You all have not been listening to me. For a while now, I have been inviting you into a conversation. I have been advocating for increased attention to the viral nature of our everyday language. I've been seeking increased engagement with our contagious communication. My work stands on the shoulders of queer crusaders and the lost generation due to AIDS. And for decades now, we have been calling you in about the fact that silence equals death. You all have not been listening to me, and we can no longer avoid this conversation. In fact, life is a series of conversations. I am Tyler Arguello, and I invite you into a conversation, one about the centrality of language, the essential importance of communication, and about why social work, curiously, is not more committed to our communicative practices. My fellow social workers, as a profession and a scholarly agenda, we seem to have abandoned who we are and what we do. In a word, pun intended, social work has one technology: language. In our modern professionalized system of help, social workers do not have white coats and scrubs like physicians, nor apparatuses for pills like pharmacists, nor stethoscopes or arm cuffs to take vitals like nurses, nor contact tracing like public health officers. And we certainly do not have clinical laboratories and the power of powerful machines to look inside and manipulate the components of the body and the lifeline of the blood. Social work has language, maybe clipboards and lanyards, as its core technology for manifesting our work towards social justice. Whether we are doing clinical work, research, teaching, and more, social workers rely principally on language to facilitate conversations that center diversity and equity, to engage client systems, to design surveys, conduct biopsychosocial assessments, to articulate a quote-unquote social work perspective in our scholarly writings and clinical team meetings, and literally, we rely on language in all of our calls to action. Given this, the irony is that we have jettisoned language as both an object as well as subject of study. We have delegitimized epistemologies and methodologies that center language, that look into language. Even more, we have failed to target language as intervention. Let me keep inviting you into this conversation. If I'm doing my job well as a promiscuous scholar, yoking together the stuff of ideas and clinical realities near and far, you may experience a disturbance in the natural order of things, vibrations around what you abide as normative ideas and behaviors, and vibrations around the naturalizing tendencies of the health sciences, of which social work certainly is. What I am scaffolding is a model through which to regard that HIV is already in all of us, regardless of serostatus, because HIV is not only the virus, the thing in our blood. HIV and its meanings are a function of the language we use every day that infects us all. Ojo, pay attention. No, HIV is not just like cancer now. As some of you may not know, language, or the science of signs, is a thing. From a more structural perspective, language has been regarded as common words associated with universalized meaning, privileging words and grammar, as if our day-to-day verbal communication is simply window dressing to our storied lives. Alternatively, from a more critical perspective, we can capsize the assumption that language is neutral and normal, and shatter the idea that meaning about our social world is natural and inert. More effectively, we can understand language relative to social, political, and cultural forces, and our communication as situated practices of production by people like you and me and institutions. This foregrounds that everything is a resource or an object available for our use to design our communication, and equally this underscores the fact that verbal language is too often impotent and only one mode of communication. So in this critical sense, our communication is built with a plethora of languages, like verbal words, like I'm using now in English, sounds like songs, behaviors like body movements and cultural traditions, visual images like TV advertisements and billboards, multimedia like social media, and material things like our knickknacks and the built environment of urban planning. The effect of this, then, is that meaning is unstable and contextual, and it becomes an act of meaning-making that attributes meaning to power, and not simply or merely attributing power to meaning. As I tell both my clients and students, it's critical for us to know when the banana is the banana and when the banana is not the banana. Or put more bluntly, when HIV is the virus that leads to AIDS, and when HIV is the deafening silence of our American government and mainstream public, underwriting the extinction of a whole generation of marginalized people and cultures. This more functional approach to language is in fact demanded of us nowadays. Our globalizing world is ever increasingly technologized and semioticized, which is to say, infused with, constituted by, and reliant upon multimedia communication. What and how we communicate is crucial in public and private lives. Language and all of its component parts, signs and symbols, information itself, their packaging, their management, are of utmost importance in sustaining our daily life and new capitalism. And this is why all of us as social welfare scholars should be excited. In this critical sense, our language and communication do things for us. They structure societal systems, they construct identities, build public spheres, disseminate knowledges, enable relationships, foment politics, transmit ideologies, and facilitate revolutions and insurrections. I would also add that our communicative practices produce health and non-health, promote our embodiment of traumas, transfer stigma and discrimination, and allow or disallow worlds in which to live. Ojo, language is a world-making endeavor. Within this, we seek to understand the behaviors and agendas of producers of communication, from the individual through the institutional. Such an approach highlights the reciprocal relationship between our language and the social world, exposing the marriage between local communicative practices, for example, when and how we utter the word HIV, with broader social practices, for example, common sense ideologies that construct everyday communication, construct policies about viruses, prevention, our bodies, and queer people. So the meaning of our everyday communication is a product of the interdependent struggles within ourselves, with others, and with societal structures. In truth, HIV has always been discursive. That is, the three little letters have always signaled struggles over power, bodies, cultures, and communication. 4 decades ago, the initial onslaught of the pandemic, coupled with the power of biomedicine, cemented the idea that HIV is only a virus. Ojo, meaning can be renegotiated. After 4 decades, HIV still carries within it the traumas of those initial bloody days, as well as the ongoing intersecting violence. The violence of anti-queerism, cis-heterosexism, transphobia, white supremacy, ethno-racism, and geographic imperialism. And for this, I contend that HIV is the preeminent social justice issue of our time, because HIV has shown us that it can inhabit and ravage all spaces: the microscopic in the blood, the embodied in the bodied politic, our sexual and social relationships, financial and political institutions, and the abstract and the ideological. And HIV is also an exemplar for the power of a functional approach to language. The material virus's stunning strategy to infect, replicate, and rework must be duplicated by us. Just like the biological virus, we too can insert ourselves into what exists, mash things up, and create something anew, more effective. Ojo, communication is contagious. But we must do this where these determinations occur, that is, in our language and communication. HIV, regarded as a function of communication, can be articulated in a framework that I have entitled HIV Stress Exchange. You see, every day there's a barter or a trade to live our lives, have relationships, exist in the public square, interact with institutions, there are always moments or opportunities for an exchange of meaning, power, ideology, and positionality. HIV is relational. And please don't misunderstand me. It's not that the virus and its lethal effects do not exist. Rather, they don't have meaning except in and through our communication. So the meaning of HIV is better regarded as an exchange or an effect of the intersection of the individual, the structural, and the relational. In this exchange, do we mindlessly accept the stress and dis-ease of dominant meanings in order to survive and comply? In what ways might we have the capacity to breathe life into alternative discourses or counter-narratives? Or what needs to be changed to be in relation with the world on, in, and by different terms, linguistically, materially, ideologically, and communicatively? In my research and clinical work around what is exchanged when we communicate HIV, I have found, among many things, unstable meanings beyond something viral. And this is not determined by someone being infected or not with the virus, and this exchange of varied meanings holds true for people who have known a time before AIDS and those who have only ever lived under the constant specter of HIV. Nowadays, HIV tells the tales of anti-sex positivity and social policing, invalidated identities and pathologized behaviors, alienation and virtual connections, longings and complicated intimacies, unintelligible and inarticulable losses, mainstream prevention parallel to ingenious ground-up health practices, and cloistered but ever-present memories. Even more, HIV still articulates deafening silence, silent conversations, as well as the palpable stress dripping off each other's tongues with the real or anticipated utterances of those letters H, I, and V. And HIV signals a stress on into our bodies, pregnant with the horniness of how we want and long to use our bodies again or at all. Let's have a real fucking conversation about the sex and intimacies that we want to have, that we can have, that we deserve. Just like you have not been listening to me, we all have not been listening to HIV. Now, for all the remaining skeptics, I know an intervention that is no cost and high impact, one that targets inequities and imbues liberation. I am talking about our language and communication. In the spaces of theoretical and applied practices with queer and marginalized people, an HIV stress exchange framework is imperative as it can facilitate communication that is less stress-inducing and more stress-resolving. An exchange-based understanding of HIV shows us we have an opportunity to have conversations differently, more justly. For the folks in the back, we know that there's a significant empirical relationship between affirmative communication and the reduction of health inequities, especially suicidality, and that a more contextualized understanding of lived experiences promotes well-being and mental health. To be clear, this is no sweat off all of our backs to transform the deployment of our language to make our communication life-saving. So be in conversation with me and HIV. Show up for your communities, clients, and yourselves by restoring your conversations about sex and gender, equity, prevention, wellness, and more. There is hope for how our conversations can unfold. For those of us charged with the welfare of modern citizens, we have an opportunity, but more so a duty, to engage more effectively with the production of our communication, to double down on the power of our core technology, language. And we can be in new conversations, that is, a renewed exchange. So thank you for hearing me. But are you now willing to listen?